So good afternoon, and so happy to be back at MBIFL with these most amazing people today, Mr. Sreenivasan Jain and Mariyam. And on that note, love Jihad. So we begin with Love Jihad, and it's a very, very important book and a very important topic considering where we are today as a nation, right? And I would like to know first, what inspired you to take on this project?
Thanks very much indeed, Nirmala, for that introduction, and thank you, Mathrubhumi Festival, for having us. It's great to be here. This is actually a co-authored book with a third author, Supriya Sharma, who couldn't be here, but Mariyam and I are very happy to be here. So essentially, it's quite funny in a way that we found ourselves tackling these sorts of theories like love jihad, like population jihad, which is another theory of the Hindu right, which presupposes the idea that Muslims will take over India just through sheer overbreeding and so on and so forth. Because till about 10 years ago, if we'd launched a book like this, we may have just 5 people in the audience. Most people would assume that these theories are rubbish or that they're indifferent to them because what's the big deal, right? These are theories that have largely existed in the margins or in the fringes of the right ecosystem for so many years. But the reason why we address this in this book is because in the past decade, they have been platformed in a manner which is unprecedented by top politicians, government ministers at the highest level. So if you take Love Jihad itself, now the Home Ministry has told Parliament that there is no definition of the term that exists under the law. But the Prime Minister himself has championed a movie, Kerala Story, as particularly those of you in the audience from Kerala know, from the election stage, saying that this movie is very important because it exposes this great conspiracy. While we know that that movie itself, the filmmakers have admitted that a substantial chunk of the claims are based on fabrications. You've had Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh platforming the idea of population jihad, that there is this Muslim plot to overrun India by Muslims producing more babies. So I think what really kind of alarmed us was how this high-level platforming of divisive theories was creating a poisonous climate in this country, was pitting one community against the other, and was creating real-world threats for minorities. Because we know the large spike that we've seen in both Islamophobia, we've seen violence against Muslims and Christians particularly increase in the past 10 years. And my last point, which again led us to this, was the fact that many of these theories now have been passed into law. As we call it, today's WhatsApp forward is tomorrow's law. There are laws that have been passed, particularly by BJP-run states, against so-called love jihad, which are basically criminalizing interfaith marriage, as a result of which dozens of Hindu-Muslim couples are, their marriages are disrupted, there are arrests that are made. Similarly, laws against conversions. Similarly, laws which seek, not yet passed, but seek to control population, again with this kind of scaremongering of a demographic takeover by Muslims. So for all these reasons, we felt that it's important to have a book which tells you the truth about these theories, and whether you're a citizen, whether you're a student, you're a journalist, or you're just fighting with someone on your WhatsApp group who's propagating these theories, you can give them a copy to say, if you want the facts, here it is.
Yeah. Does it work?
Hello? Yeah. I'm just going to add to that. As journalists also, I felt, or we felt rather, the mediascape in India as well. A lot of these theories are not just being platformed by politicians for political gains. You have some of these words being part of everyday discourse because it's beaming into your living rooms through your television channels, right? You have news anchors repeating these claims without challenging it. And as journalists, while we were at NDTV, we have tackled some of these topics ourselves, and there are some independent journalists who are also doing great work on these, sometimes at great personal and professional costs. But those were tackling individual instances, and as TV journalists, and because of the nature of journalism, it's so transient, we wanted something that would last longer than one news cycle. And for that, I think a book was the best option.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of work because I'm just going through all the pages and there are so many aspects that you'll have covered. But taking off on the point that you just made, Mariyam, we were talking a little while ago and you said it's so much sentiment versus fact, So, and that's pretty much the undertone of why you all have kind of gone into this. Could you elaborate on that and then Sreenivasan too?
Yeah. I would like to illustrate this with an example. While we were at NDTV, one of the topics that we deal with in the book is about forced conversions. This idea that there's this Christian mafia that is converting people en masse into Christianity, Hindus into Christianity, basically to take over and increase the Christian population in this country. We had tackled this topic during one of the shows that we had done, and somebody who's a very well-known figure here in Kerala is part of many news panels and calls himself a Hindu activist, Rahul Ishwar, had tweeted out to us saying that, please, Mr. Sreenivasan Jain and Ms. Mariyam Alavi, please don't go after facts. This is about Hindu feeling. Now, how do you combat feelings with facts? Facts by its nature are supposed to be rational, are supposed to be objective, whereas feelings are subjective, irrational, it comes from an emotional place. That is the biggest challenge that we're facing today. So no matter what you do, even during our ground reportage, where I've reported on Love Jihad, if you ask the mother of the girl, where the family is alleging that my daughter has been kidnapped by her lover and she's being made prey of Love Jihad, if you ask her, क्यों? नहीं, मुझे लगता है. ये ऐसे लोग हैं, मुझे लगता है. Now, how do you combat लगता है? How do you combat feelings with just facts? And that's the biggest challenge that we are facing these days.
So, I know that this keeps coming up about how do you take on this volcano of lies. And the fact is that actually as journalists, in some ways, that's not our primary responsibility to sway opinion. What we can do is simply hold up the mirror, we can shine the light, and then we have to expect society to do the rest. Because again, I can't emphasize this enough. These are political fictions. These are no longer confined to some WhatsApp forward or some social media post. I'll just give you an example which we've mentioned in our book. There's a WhatsApp forward which says that in the movie Sholay, more electricity was supplied to the Muslim quarter during Eid than to the Hindu quarter. So poor Thakur, one of the characters in Sholay in the fictional village of Ramgarh, is wandering around with a lantern in the dark. Why? Why? Because the writer of Sholay is Javed Akhtar, a Muslim. Right? Now you would ordinarily think this is absurd. Cut to 2019 when UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath is actually making this claim from an election state, saying more electricity was supplied during Eid compared to Diwali during the time of the Samajwadi Party. This is, the question of Muslim appeasement. Now, we can only approach this through the way we know, which is to just look at the facts. So we actually crunched through electricity records of the past decade, of that period, to show that the reality is something very different. Because obviously, electricity is not supplied on the basis of festivals. It's supplied on the basis of seasonal supply and demand. So ultimately, to answer the point that you made, Nirmala, that we treated these theories like we would approach an investigation into political corruption or corporate embezzlement. So we filed RTIs. We did shoe leather reporting. We looked at parliamentary records. So that if people are reading it, they feel that we are not coming with an agenda. It's not, oh, Sreenivasan Jain, NDTV, Mariyam, it's so easy to slot us. It's just dispassionate facts presented as calmly as possible. We've kept the tone of it not too heavy. It's a slim book. You can easily get through it in a flight or a train journey. It's got a claim and conclusion format, so it makes it more readable. So I think one of the ways in which you try to push back is that it's not about facts themselves, but how you present it. And our expectation is by doing it in this way, it'll make it a little easier for people, even if they're undecided, right? Not just echo chamber, but people who may feel maybe there's something to this, that you pick it up and think, okay, maybe this may help me think about some of these things differently.
Yeah. You know, we were discussing another point in the car to the festival. Sreenivasan was telling me how very few people in India actually marry outside their communities. You know, that is another sentiment that's kind of, I think, ingrained into this whole narrative that you'll have taken up. Do you want to elaborate a bit on that and also move on to what is happening in Uttar Pradesh now,
Right.
you know, in some of the cases that you have reported?
Yeah, so I think of all the theories, and there's no shortage of jihads these days that emanate from the Hindu right. There's even something now called fertilizer jihad, etc. This idea of love jihad, which again the Hindu rights claim originates in Kerala, and we extensively show you how that's actually not the case. I mean, the original case, so to speak, has been substantively debunked by the courts themselves and the police. But we felt this, in a way, was the cruelest of all the theories, because interfaith relationships are a very small percentage of all relationships. Available data shows you that only 2% of, just over 2% of all couples in India are interfaith. But if you go by the right-wing propaganda, it makes it seem there's this huge Islamic conspiracy to marry and convert Hindu women. But just this fragile idea of people across communities falling in love, which is such a wonderful thing for a multi-faith society like India, right? Like, what better way of bringing people together, has been targeted in this extraordinary way with this idea that there's a conspiracy. And essentially, if you go case after case after case, it's just examples of people who are either consensual, you know, Hindu-Muslim couples that the families have had an objection, and so the police and the right wing enters and labels it as love jihad. Or there may be genuine examples of strife between Hindu-Muslim couples, which are then passed off as an Islamic conspiracy to target and harass Hindu women. And I think that's what makes this a particularly toxic idea. As I said, it is now passed into law. It's having a real world impact on couples from, solemnizing their relationships. And as you mentioned Uttar Pradesh, we actually looked at some of the case studies there, if Mariyam wants to talk about the cases that have already been booked by the UP police. UP, by the way, since they passed the anti-love jihad law in 2020, in about a year and a half, they proudly announced that we've registered 500 cases under this law against, a large number of them are interfaith couples.
So, we had filed multiple Right to Information Act requests asking for the kind of cases your chief ministers are saying that Hindu women are falling prey to love jihad. So tell us about the love jihad cases that you've seen in your state. Most of those responses that you'll see in the book were brought out nothing. UP, like he said, was one of the few states that say that they had filed multiple cases against their, under their conversion laws, love jihad laws. We looked at a random sampling of about 5 cases for the book, and most of those seemed to be either consensual relationships that were opposed by their parents, and because of which Hindutva groups got involved, and then they got cases registered against the Muslim boy. Or it was cases of actual issues between the couple. It could be gender-based crimes, domestic violence. Those were labeled as love jihad. Now that's the issue here. Now, if a Hindu man and a Hindu woman, if the accused is also a Hindu man, it's a rape case. If the accused is a Muslim man and the woman is Hindu, it's a love jihad case. If the accused is a Hindu man and the woman is Hindu, it's a case of domestic violence. Now, if the man is Muslim, it's love jihad. So that is the problem here. Or they brought in all cases under the ambit of gender crime. Everything has been brought under the ambit of love jihad. Your name now determines your crime. If you have a Muslim name, if you're a Muslim man, your crime will be very different if the same thing is being done by a Hindu man. You will be accused of something different.
Yeah, could you bring up some of those case studies? You know, there was one, the Kerala case study, and then yeah, of course, we can probably move to Kerala now since we are here. And then you could, yeah.
So, very briefly, because, I mean, we don't want to spend our entire time just talking on Love Jihad, because the book covers a spectrum of different theories. But essentially, because the contention is that it originated here in Kerala, and the Hindu rights assertion is that it was anxiety first raised by the Catholics. This is very important to them because it makes it seem that this is not just a Hindutva anxiety, that Love Jihad was first raised by the Christians. We actually found that it was ambiguous. It's not clear whether it was first raised by the Catholic Bishop Council in 2009 or whether it was raised by a Hindu right-wing outfit, the Hindu Jan Jagruti Samiti. But anyway, essentially in 2009, the Kerala High Court first raised it, Justice K.T. Shankaran, in the case of two interfaith couples where essentially the women had been sort of almost quote-unquote, kidnapped by their parents because they didn't want them to marry these two Muslim boys. So they went to court, and in the course of that, Justice Shankaran passed this order where he said that the police should investigate Love Jihad or Romeo Jihad in Kerala. And that order is what essentially has been cited repeatedly by the Hindu right to say that this is proof that Love Jihad is real and it first originated in Kerala. What you will not see enough, or what doesn't get enough publicity, but which a simple Google search will tell you, is that a year later, that case collapsed because the police came back to the court and said there's no evidence of any such thing. And the subsequent judge who heard it closed the case, discharged the men, and that was the end of that. We also have unusually an interview with one of the young men, at that time perhaps younger than he is today, Shehen Shah, who's narrated the whole account, and it's quite a lot of fascinating detail in case you want to read it, because he's not really spoken to the press before. But again, to the point that even though this case was a sort of an open and shut thing, it has been closed more than a decade ago. It continues to get repeatedly circulated with this idea that it started in Kerala, it is still a problem in Kerala, you have a movie made about it, and the Prime Minister is actually promoting it.
No, I'm just going to add to that. As a woman, as every woman in the state, even in this case, it's illustrated how women are many a times in Love Jihad cases, they are denied their agency. So even in this particular case that as we have reported, and if you've read about the case in 2009, you'll remember when the women first came to court, the parents had filed a habeas corpus after the women had eloped with their lovers. And when the women were brought to court, they initially said that they want to go back with their husbands. But in a very paternalistic view, the court said they have to go back with their parents. The agency was denied there, in a way, right? Because the women said, this is what we want to do, but they said, no, you have to go back with your parents. And that is something that repeatedly you'll see in a lot of these Love Jihad cases. You tell the right wing that these are consensual cases, they will, many of them refuse to accept that. Because to them, as a woman, to me, it seems like you're trying to say that a woman cannot decide for herself who her partner should be, who she should marry, what religion she should follow. Every time you're constantly told that the women have been brainwashed.
Yeah. In fact, Sreenivasan was also telling me how this narrative is not restricted to Muslims alone. It is, people are talking about the other minorities like Christianity. So could you kind of expand on that, how it's kind of impacting the nation and what the kind of narrative the right wing is putting forth?
So the entire theme of the book, Nirmala, I think can be encompassed by that one phrase, right? Hindu khatre mein hai. Hindu kyun khatre mein hai? One, because of Love Jihad. Muslims are marrying your Hindu women and converting them. Two, because Hindu khatre mein hai means Hindus are in danger. And why? One, because of Love Jihad, because you're marrying the Hindu women and converting them. Two, there is a Christian mafia, a conversion mafia that are converting Hindus en masse. Three, by population jihad, because Muslims are overbreeding and trying to take over Hindu population. And four, this is all being made possible because minorities and especially Muslims in this country are being appeased by the so-called secular parties. So conversion is also, conversions by Christians. It's not just Muslims. And this is a major point to be made here because we can see the right wing hobnobbing and trying to cater to the Christian community here. But if you move out of Kerala, Christians are also part of enemy number one for the right wing. And we have looked at the claims of forced conversions. Again, there is nothing to indicate a conspiracy. When we talk about a conspiracy, there may be isolated cases. When we talk about a conspiracy, we are talking about a network that is organized and that are actually sitting and planning and strategizing to take over the country and take over the population. We have seen no such evidence of that. We have, in fact, one of the mainstream, this was platformed in the mainstream media because an MLA from Karnataka, Gulihati Shekhar, had made this impassioned speech in assembly saying that even his mother had fallen prey. We have in fact traveled all the way to Karnataka. I met Gulihati Shekhar's mother. I've spoken to her. That interview is a part of the book. I've spoken to other people from his constituency who have converted to Christianity. I've spoken to them. You can read what we've found in detail in the book, but largely it shows us that none of them said that they had been pressured or forced to convert.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, again, just to kind of pull back a little bit, because just consider this, that, the idea that 170, 200 million Hindus, I beg your pardon, 170, 200 million Muslims and Christians who make up 2% of the population are going to overwhelm 1 billion plus Hindus is, in a way, it's a kind of the foundational big lie which is currently driving the momentum of our ruling establishment. And we've seen the impact that these fundamental falsehoods are having the world over, right? So if you look at what has happened in America, the big lie there is Donald Trump's claim of a stolen election, and that has unsettled the foundations of American democracy because it's coming not from any fringe or extreme corner of the news ecosystem or the right-wing ecosystem. It's coming from a president himself. Similarly here, and this is the theme that's running through our book, this is capturing the current moment we're in, where this repeated attempt to claim that when you have today perhaps the most majoritarian state that this country has ever seen since independence, despite that, you still have to claim that the majority is under threat. Now, how do you do that? Because you won every political and cultural battle, and after the consecration of the Ram temple, that final chip that was left has also shifted. So the way you do that is by constantly propagating these theories and fictions that the majority is under threat by some kind of this or that jihad. And so, as long as we are not able to constantly challenge and question these claims, if you look at the epigraph of our book, we cite Carl Sagan, the scientist and popular writer. There's the Sagan principle that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It's an extraordinary claim to make that Muslims are conspiring to seduce and convert Hindu women, right? But it's got so normalized now. So I think unless as citizens, as other stakeholders in this democracy, we don't question this fundamental untruth or grievance which is being propagated to ensure that there is a political continuity of the current regime and which is also dividing us, we are going to be facing the same threats that other democracies across the world are facing, which are being destabilized by the sheer force of falsehoods and fictions.
So how are the common people who are not extreme right-wing feeling about this? Like I, a common person who is not right-wing, who is not extreme here or there. And, you might have met a lot of people like this. And I'm born into a Hindu family, but I don't follow Hinduism, right? Or any religion for that matter. I feel threatened living here. So what do you think the sentiment is, around the country, especially during the course of your work, when you met different people? Where is this all headed?
It is very difficult today in India, according to me. This could be a very myopic view, but to me, in India today, it's very difficult to find somebody who doesn't have an opinion on these matters, right? You either agree with it or you disagree with it. And you do so strongly in a lot of times. And that's because these things have become part of our lexicon, they're part of our everyday discourse. And because of that, the society is also highly polarized. You have, and like we've talked about in the book and like Vasu mentioned, because of the polarization in society and because of the mainstreaming of these theories, these also have very real world consequences. It's not just about demonizing a community anymore. It's about multiple Muslim men languishing in jails because of conversion laws. It's not just about demonizing Christians anymore. It's about prayer halls being disrupted, people being beaten up, people being heckled and harassed in real life. And it does have, there are fears. I have a Muslim sounding name. I come from a Muslim family. I have a baby. I had to consider, what should I name my child? Do I want an explicitly Muslim sounding name or not? These were not conversations I think my parents probably thought of when I was born. But these are conversations that we are having to have now. Like you said, you probably don't actually subscribe to any particular religious ideology, but you're saying you feel unsafe. But at the same time, if you say you're unsafe, you will be heckled and harassed for saying that. We are intolerant of people saying that there is intolerance in this country.
Yeah.
So, again, talking about sentiment, look, it's not as if because of the fact that there is a virality to these theories or to this current majoritarian tilt that we've taken as a country, that we as a country, I would still like to believe that there are still a fundamental middle, a great middle of people who are sensible, who, certainly may feel unclear or confused because of the sheer volume of divisive propaganda, but still retain a core sense of decency. And I think that, I don't want to necessarily ascribe it to any particular religious thought, but like with all communities, whether it's Hindus, Muslims, you will have a majority of sensible-minded, reasonable Indians who hopefully at some point will begin to see that a lot of this is, is being done for political gain and is actually taking away from this extraordinarily rich, diverse society we all inhabit. But again, coming back to this idea of how to combat it, we don't hold the other democratic institutions to account, which are supposed to act as checks and balances. Where are the courts? Where is the police? Where are our law enforcement agencies? If a politician is standing on a stage and making a false claim about love jihad, which happened in Muzaffarnagar in Uttar Pradesh in 2013, a false claim about love jihad triggered riots because it was amplified by BJP politicians. Many of those people, some rudimentary cases booked, today they're all celebrated. They're all, they became stars. Similarly, the courts make so much noise about hate speech and, this is terrible, but there is total impunity. The political parties reward hate mongers. The courts and the police are either cowered into silence or have different standards when it comes to those in power. And of course, the media, night after night, amplifies these theories and there are no consequences. So the absence of consequences is a big factor in where we are. If you start arresting and throwing some of these characters into jail for just 1 or 2 or 3 comments they made, you'll immediately see a change. But today, because of the absence of that, there is a kind of unchecked, uncontrolled flood. And I think that's again something that we should focus on, because we keep asking ourselves, what do you do? What does the journalist do? What do I do? What does society do? What about the other gatekeepers of democracy, right? Where are they in all this?
No, that's so interesting, because as media people are also restricted. So you all have had to step out of that mainstream, arena and kind of put it all together in a book. So, could you talk about...
No, but just to be clear, at least we were privileged of being part of a platform and a network at a time earlier, now not, of course, where we could actually report on all this stuff, and we did it night after night, and actually the book kind of originated from that. Yeah. So, but that was an exception, and now that exception is also gone. So.
We moved, and everything is pointing towards women. I feel lower than a cow in this country, as a woman. And so the narrative moved from women to their clothes, to who they're marrying, and now to this cow protection law. So could you talk a bit about that?
So another topic that we talk about in the book is about hate speech and actually what we call hateful lies. which is not just coming from a place of bigotry and hate, but it's also entirely false. And one of those things that we talk about is that in the run-up to the 2014 elections, Narendra Modi, our current Prime Minister, repeatedly brought up this claim of a pink revolution, which is essentially that cows are being slaughtered for meat and that's being exported under the UPA government. And what this saw, again, this is not just rhetoric, this is not just words, this has real-world consequences, because cut to after elections 2015, Akhlaq is murdered over the suspicion that his family had slaughtered a cow and they had stored beef in their fridge. What is even worse is that the meat is sent for forensic examining to know whether it's beef or not, because that at that point was, for some reason, was more important than the loss of a life. So cow protection law, and these cow protection laws in Kerala, I know it's not a major talking point anymore. In fact, even the BJP here, I remember in Malpuram and all that, BJP leaders promise grade A beef if they are elected. But anywhere else, you have multiple states either tightening their existing laws or introducing new laws, which means virtually, other than a handful of states that we talk about, including Kerala, anywhere else, getting beef is also like, even if it's legal, buff meat is legal, even getting that is almost like scoring drugs in a lot of ways. It's a very clandestine arrangement. In Delhi, for that matter, it's very difficult to get buff meat as well, even though it's legal under the state laws. You have to put yourself at risk. I remember my earlier cook, when he used to bring buff, even though it's legal, I used to tell him, do not take the metro when you're buying meat and coming back, because I don't know who's going to think what it is. And so cow protection laws have also been strengthened, and that's something that we talk about extensively in the book, and I would encourage people to read our book to know more.
Would you like to add to that?
No, again, I think just going back to the point that Mariyam was making, that just consider this, because if you remember during the 2014 campaign, when then Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi, was running as the Prime Ministerial candidate, a lot was made of the fact that he had put this attempt to be a kind of hero of Hindutva behind him. He was now speaking the language of Vikas. He was speaking the language of development. There was a kind of rebranding. If you look at his speeches, they were largely true. It is true that he stayed away from communal rhetoric for the most part, except for that one claim he kept on repeating, especially in the Hindi belt states, where cow protection has always had a sensitive resonance, of the pink revolution. And it was an extraordinary claim that there's this huge conspiracy to illegally slaughter and export beef which has the sanction of a previous government, the existing regime at that time. It barely received the kind of scrutiny it did. And the consequences of that, when Mariyam mentioned Akhlaq, lynching of Muslims and others in the name of the cow has a long history in this country. But when you counted the data, it's in the book, you witness a dramatic spike post-2014, and you can almost draw a line to that speech or the repetition of those speeches and what follows next. So again, if those in power are going to platform theories which largely so far were confined to the fringes of different ecosystems, right or left and so on, then the consequences for us as a society are devastating. And I think that's the reason why we felt that it was important to kind of, because it's not as if this hasn't been tackled before, but you have a kind of guide which will tell you that every time if you hear a repetition of this, elections are coming up now, election season is going to mean more such claims, you will have something that will hopefully help you, navigate this storm that's coming.
Also, on that note, you've also spoken about how there's this theory that the Muslim fertility rate is higher in South India as compared to the national average.
No, so the claim is that Muslims are overbreeding, as in Muslims are having more kids, which is one way of overtaking the Hindu population. So what we've looked at is that we've looked at fertility data, and yes, there's a kernel of truth to that on average Muslims are having more kids, but what they leave out from that is that the gap is closing. The gap between the Hindus and Muslim fertility rates is closing. In fact, the Muslim fertility rate is falling faster than Hindu fertility rate. And also, fertility does not have anything to do with religion. Because if we look at data, Muslims in Kerala have fewer kids than Hindus, say, in Bihar. So this clearly shows you that fertility has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with socioeconomic status, your education levels, your awareness, etc. But the Hindu right wing has framed this as almost a religious conspiracy. Again, population jihad, a different type of jihad, again, a fight for religion. And that Muslims are doing this out of design, and it is a well-planned, strategized method to overtake Hindu population.
No, so just very quickly to add to that, it's important to understand that not every theory is based entirely on falsehoods. The spectrum of political obfuscation, propaganda, lies covers a range of different ways in which you present facts. So some of these theories actually have a kernel of truth in them. For example, the claim that Muslims have a higher fertility rate or a higher growth rate than other religious communities in India, which is cited as evidence of this idea of a jihad or an attempt to overrun Hindus, is based on truth. It is true that Muslims do have a higher fertility rate and a higher growth rate, but it's falling, right? So only the first part is what you'll be told. The second part is that those rates are actually coming down as they are of all communities. So the idea that at some point Muslims will overrun Hindus is absurd. It's been debunked by a series of well-respected Indian demographers. But that's again the sort of success of these theories, that sometimes you'll hear an outright falsehood like love jihad, sometimes you'll take something which has the kernel of a fact in it, and on it you'll build a mountain of fabrication.
Yeah, so before I throw open the stage for questions, I have one myself. So how safe is a Muslim in India today? You've met a lot, you've interacted with a lot of people. How safe do they feel today? Or not feel?
No, I would not really sort of respond to that question because, that I know it's coming from a good place, but it can turn into a loaded question because the moment you sort of make claims, I mean, it's impossible for any one individual of us to make claims for, 200 million strong population. I think the facts speak for themselves. I mean, in terms of what we are witnessing in this country, in terms of everything that is being said and done and the shift, I think that just tells you enough. How people negotiate that is a complex thing, right? Like, there are different ways in which you have to find your way through a challenging time. Every time this comes up, suppose I were to say, of course they're scared, etc., you'll straight away see 5 people flooding me on Twitter with quotes of Muslims saying we're having the most wonderful time and we think we're in Amrit Kal. It's quite often the same 5 people you'll see every time, but regardless. So it's a very tricky thing to get into. I think, all our eyes and ears are open, and I think, that's really, I think, more evidence than anything else.
So let's hope for the best that with this book there are more kindred minds. And now can we have questions? Does anyone have questions?
I'm Ramya Girija. My question is, there are a lot of conspiracy theories and falsehoods you might have confronted as a journalist. Then why you people selected this particular topic? That is one. And the second question I'm associating with this. What is the reason you people, three people associated, that Sreenivasan Jain, Mariyam Alavi and Supriya Sharma came together to write this book? Why single individual couldn't do this?
My mother asked me the same question. After almost a year and a half when the book came out, she said, 3 of you worked together and you only came out with such a small book. What were you doing all this time? Are you going to write another book? I said, first, let's just enjoy this book. So I'll take the first part and then Mariyam can perhaps respond to the second. Why these theories? It's a good question. Our publisher also asked us the same question because India is currently the Vishwa Guru when it comes to false information. I'm not saying this. The World Economic Forum has certified India as the #1 country which faces the highest risk of false information. More than pandemics, more than climate change, false information is the greatest risk. So we are blessed or cursed as journalists to have a rich buffet of all kinds of falsehoods and conspiracies to choose from. But the reason why we chose this is something that we tackled at the introduction of the session, where we said that we picked these theories particularly because unlike, say, falsehoods about economic success, or that the 2,000 rupee note has a nano GPS chip embedded in it, those are not great. But these have a way of dividing and unsettling us in a way that perhaps some of these other theories don't. And these are also new. This is not normal for these sorts of theories to be platformed at the highest level. So that's why we zeroed on this, because, you know, we are limited. There are just a few of us. How many can we tackle? So let's tackle what we felt were the most divisive, toxic, and those which have been platformed at the highest level, passed into law. And so that's the sort of short list we came up with.
I mean, why the three of us, Vasu needed help. No, jokes apart. I think this started as conversation between me and Vasu. Vasu and I used to work together at NDTV. He started out as my boss and mentor and then quickly became a friend. And so we used to tackle a lot of these topics on our shows, Reality Check and Truth versus Hype before that. And I used to constantly ask him why hasn't he written a book yet. As a journalist of his stature, a lot of journalists have written books and he hadn't written one yet. And he had in fact told us that I'll write one when each one member of my team agrees to write one chapter each. And I held him to that and I said, okay, fine, we'll also get together and we'll write a book. And then we started working on this in June 2022 together. And after we were on a short break from work, though it might look thin to you, that's because we've distilled a lot of the information out so that it's easier for you to read. There's a lot of work that's gone into it. Our research is probably 10 volumes of this size. But so after we took a little break to work on this, and after we went back to work, we quickly realized that with the kind of challenging news cycles that we had, we would need extra help as well. And Supriya Sharma, who's this brilliant journalist at Scroll, she agreed to come in and help us with some work. And then it was just an organic thing that she joined the team, and then we got this book out in a year.
Hi, thank you very much for that, Mariyam and Vasu. Two questions, one very basic and the other slightly broader. Forgive my ignorance, but do Hindu boys also marry Muslims? Is that love jihad too? Does that doesn't happen at all? That's not love jihad. So that's ignored, is it?
Hindu men marry.
Oh, okay.
Are
you asking whether there is a phenomenon of Hindu men marrying Muslim women?
I do know that happens, but is that not considered?
Oh, yeah. No, of course not. Because the whole idea is that you cherry pick instances where Muslims marry or court Hindu women. In fact, very quickly on that, it's quite interesting because the whole contention is that one of the definitions of love jihad, as I mentioned, there's no clear definition, but one of them is that Muslims conceal their identity to seduce and woo Hindu women, right? This whole idea that Arshad becomes Ashok to entrap. And when we filed an RTI about conversions and about these cases, there was actually a case that came from Jharkhand. In 2020, Abida Begum registered a case against her husband, who she thought was a Muslim. 4 years into their marriage, she discovered that he's Buddhadev Thakur, a Hindu, who had a wife, another wife, which he'd concealed from her all along. Now, what is this? What conspiracy do we call this? So, obviously, deception, all kinds of ways in which women in this country face all sorts of complicated, negotiations of their marriage is true of all communities. But the idea is to cherry pick those instances where it's Muslim man, Hindu woman, and label it as love jihad. But there are many more such Buddhadevs if we start looking.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted you to focus on a few of those. A larger question, you mentioned, Mariyam, both of you actually trump the the replacement theory, the fringe theories which work around. And I'm wondering at this point, given the massive influx of technology, media, is there a moment that we think that democracy, the nation state itself is in crisis? Sorry, it's a big, large extrapolation of your work, but just trying to make you think through from a larger perspective.
To me, when you have this constant othering of a certain part of the country, that itself puts your democracy in crisis, right? You're pitting Indians against Indians here. Let's be clear. It's not about pitting Hindus against Muslims. Today, it's about Hindus against Muslims. Tomorrow, it'll be somebody else versus somebody else. Because that's how you hold on to power, right? Othering. And that othering, to me, is a major threat to democracy and our way of life and society. But I would like to defer this to Vasu if he wants to elaborate.
I think, Somnath, it's a very valid question. It's perhaps a whole another session in itself. And I'm sure there are sessions in this festival which address it. But you're right to say that whether it's India or the US, the shift that we're seeing is unsettling fundamental notions of what constitutes a democracy. And much has been written about this, about how you can both have the veneer of democracy, where you go through the rigmarole of elections, et cetera, et cetera. So, India can turn around and say we're the mother of democracy, while actually what's going on within that structure is that you've moved the needle away from all the different guardrails that constitute a healthy or a robust democracy, which is why countries like India are now being called a half democracy or a democratic autocracy. So there are these hybrid terms that are being coined to describe the moment that many countries, whether it's India, Orban's Hungary, Trump's America, that sort of shift that we're seeing.
Mariyam and Sreenivasan, first of all, thank you for the book. I think we need this kind of literature in this kind of scenario happening in the country. Coming to my question, see, you, in the beginning, you were talking about holding on to facts as a way of tackling this huge sentimental approach. Do you see near future, which, by the way, I also think your approach is the right approach, but do you see in the near future there is an impending difficulty to find facts which are actually facts? Because the places where these facts are emanating from, the supreme houses that you talked about, the gatekeepers of democracy, these houses have already been breached. Let's take NCRT. NCRT is supposed to speak of facts. And next generation is learning pseudoscience as facts. So do you see a future where holding on to facts cannot actually serve the purpose?
So I believe there are objective facts and subjective truths. What we're seeing now is that the subjective truths, what I mean by that is that what you believe to be true. And that could be different from person to person. Your perception of it can be different. But what you're talking about facts and the difficulty to hold on to that, even during the course of writing this book, credible data is a challenge now, and it's becoming an increasing challenge. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to access data and credible data. For example, even the Parliament website went through a facelift while we were working on this book. It's become increasingly more difficult to mine data from parliamentary answers now. We have an entire bit in the book dedicated to this concept of illegal immigrants, and we have debunked that based on parliament answers, where parliament has repeatedly said that they have no actual figures of illegal immigrants or Ghuspetia or infiltrators like the government was repeatedly claiming. They have no data on how many such people exist in this country. But if I were to do that research now, it would take me maybe double, triple the time, because it is so much more difficult to search that website now, the Parliament Answers website. And access to data is becoming a huge challenge in this country. Access to credible data is becoming a huge challenge in this country, yes. But whether about a future, I don't like to be prophetic, because I feel I feel that making prophecies about the future is a very dicey thing to do. So I do not like being prophetic at all.
I mean, how do you explain the highly educated IIT graduates, IIM graduates, all falling for this rhetoric, debunking the facts and figures and going with the feelings?
I wish I could answer that. I mean, I look at my own classmates, you know, people I grew up with, and I just see, I see what's going on. I mean, there's been so much work done on this whole phenomenon of post-truth and the idea that, you know, people now inhabit echo chambers and confirmation bias, where you just want to believe things that you may have had long-held views about other communities and so on. But again, I mean, not to labor the point, but it's not so much a phenomenon of the fact that rumors and half-truths and propaganda existed, because they always did. I think the question is, why have they acquired such prominence that they're overwhelming us? And again, I come back to it, that it is because of the fact that they have been given the kind of platforming that they never received in the past. So if you're going to have elected representatives tell you that this theory or that theory is true, then the manner in which it's going to seep into society, whether you're fully educated, half, or not educated, is going to be at a different magnitude. So it's really that challenge. It's the challenge that it's coming from power, from a place of, in fact, the highest tiers of power, that is led to, as you said, you know, tomorrow it could be IIT, IIM, whatever it is, where you now have validation, because you can now turn around and say, listen, the PM, CM, DM, or whoever is now actually, you know, pushing these theories. It's no longer some sort of, you know, echo chamber on WhatsApp. So I think that's really what's been the most unsettling aspect of our current moment.
Thank you so much. Thanks for throwing light, and we hope we remain a democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us and for this wonderful audience.